Hello, dear friends. So I'm back today with a new video, the second in the series of Management for Doctors, which is an effort to make our doctors more management conscious. Well, I'm Dr. Roopam Gupta, a doctor, a teacher, and a hospital administrator. I'm humbly sharing whatever little I have learnt about the science and art of management from my teachers through self study of management books and, most importantly, my own experience. If you have not seen my first introductory part of this series, the link is there in the description. So sit back and relax, as today's video will surely get you thinking out of the box. Today we discuss about what is formally called in management lingo as the approaches to management. My main goal is to amalgamate the science of management and medical profession. I would rename this as evolution of management thinking. Well, why should we learn about evolution of management thinking? Well, the simple answer is the medical profession that we know of today has itself been distilled down the ages. There have been healers, healing methods, pathies existing since times immemorial, and at no point of time were these methods of treatment considered as wrong. They were correct according to the situation at that time. Similarly, managers always existed. Management processes, schools of thought always existed. So it's always a very good idea if we learn from the past so that basically we don't repeat any of the mistakes and use whatever was good in the past into the context today. Remember how we scuttled during these COVID times to find out the treatment, and there was a method of repurposing of old drugs also. HCQ being a glaring example. Therefore, not reinventing the wheel, let us try to learn what existed in the past regarding approaches to management. Well, the first one, narrative approach, however, is not a formal management teaching. It is addition from my side. I hope I am able to justify the narrative approach. Further, we will be learning about the early approach, the classical approach, behavioral approach, quantitative approach, and latest modern approaches to management. Let me confess my bias towards being Indian and all what is Indian. In ancient Indian Vedic management, we had Lok Sangra, human welfare, Shubh Labh, profits through ethical means, Nishkam Karma, action without greed, Vasudev Kutumbakam, accepting the entire world as one family, and Ati Hayastha Varjayet, or avoidance of any extreme. These teachings were there in the Vedas. I call this period of management thinking as the narrative approach. Simply because narrative means writing that tells a story. Now, in this narrative approach, we had lessons for the managers for every event which is described in this great book like Ramayana. Ram as the leader, the Maryada Purushottam. There is a setting or an event which acts like a model, which acts like a lesson for you. You imagine the work of building the Ram Setu. What better example on motivation and teamwork? You remember the story where three fingers were rubbed against the back of a little squirrel, recognizing and motivating the smallest of the contributions of the team members. Imagine the kind of motivation and skill required to transform a whole band of monkeys into an army that took on the mighty army of Ravan. And imagine the ethical standards that were there when the Agni Pariksha of Mata Sita was there. These stories acted as templates or models for people to follow. Therefore, I call this approach as the narrative approach. You may take a relook on your own name or that of your parents. Now, do you know the reason for you being named the way you are? You don't find anybody by the name of Ravan Gupta or Kekai Patel, do you? The narrative approach continued in the Mahabharat era with Bhagavad Gita being a prime management book, the supreme example of leadership in Krishna and of motivation in Arjuna. You have the famous shloka karmaneyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. That means you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. And never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. The same Mahabharat era also gave us Vidur and the Vidur Niti, and I would like to call him the first management guru. He was the advisor to the blind king Dhritarashtra. He wrote Vidur Niti, which is a treatise on how to manage an enterprise in a novel way of flawless communication, ethical practices, customer satisfaction. Inspiration from work itself is the most powerful motivation. A quote from this book. There are many ways to achieve desired outcome, but it will not be accompanied with the desired happiness which is there in adopting the ethical way. And undoubtedly, the greatest of the Indian management gurus, Kautilya, Vishnu Gupta, or Chanakya. He created Arthashastra, the treatise on political economy. It's a guide for those who govern. It talks about an inside out approach to management, where self management comes first. You have to conquer yourself, greed, desire, anger, arrogance, and then you are prepared to conquer all. He was the advisor to Chandragupta Maurya, and he told him to rule with vision, Prabhu Shakti, mission, Mantra Shakti, and motivation, Utsaha Shakti. Now let me shed my bias of being only Indian. Around the world, there were several great civilizations blooming, especially around the fertile beds. Each developed their own approaches to management. The Sumerians were the people of southern Mesopotamia, whose civilization flourished around 5000 BC. Sumer had merchant culture, where grains, livestock, perfumes, and pottery were sold to customers. They used clay coins instead of the old barter system. There was writing for record keeping, and the famous Code of Hammurabi existed, which had dictums like eye for an eye. And the first duty of the government is to protect the powerless from the powerful. And then we had Egypt. The pyramids of Egypt. Just imagine the management and leadership skills that went into getting these great structures built. China had Confucius, or Kong Fu Zi, who was a thinker, philosopher, teacher, and a political figure. He wrote Analects. He was a great advocate of training, personal development, visionary leadership, teamwork, and employee empowerment. He was the one who gave the idea of meritocracy. A few of his famous quotes, and the one which especially I like: real knowledge is to know the extent of your ignorance. There is a wonderful book by Morgan Witzel, Management from the Masters, and he starts from the master himself, Confucius. In 500 BC, we had the great philosopher Socrates, or Sukrat. He advocated the dialectic method of inquiry, or the Socratic method as it is known as. This is very close to the root cause analysis, what we do today. To solve a problem, it would be broken down into a series of questions, and the answers to it would gradually be distilled into the answer the person was seeking. He famously quoted, "Management was a competency distinctly separate from possessing technical skills and knowledge." Now let us start with the more formal management science of learning, as they teach in management schools. It is called the early approaches. It started during the Industrial Revolution. Well, the Industrial Revolution brought about many changes very quickly. Employees no longer worked from home or their own shops. They had to go to factories to work. The factory system or the machine system became the dominant feature of the economy. The early approaches, we talk of Robert Owen, who managed a group of textile mills in Lanark, Scotland. He is called the pioneer of personal management. He famously said, workers' performance is influenced by the environment of the workplace. He was the advocate of 8 hours work a day, and he fixed the minimum age of labor as 10 years. Charles Babbage, yes, it was surprising to find the father of computers in the early approaches to management, but yes, he invented the Babbage principle, or the commercial advantages available with careful division of labor, which went into the invention of the assembly line. During this period, we also had Henry Robinson Town, who thought about management as a new social role for engineers. He said that the development of management technique was important for developing the engineering profession. Next is the classical approach of management. Well, in this approach, which is known as the oldest formal school of management thought, it was based on the belief that workers only have physical and economical needs. It had three schools of thought: the scientific, the administrative, and the bureaucratic. Let me try to explain with the help of this Venn diagram. Scientific management focused on the individual worker's productivity, while the administrative management focused on the functions of the management, and bureaucratic management focused on the overall organization system. Well, the first classical approach, the scientific management approach, we had Frederick Winslow Taylor, who is called as the father of scientific management. He started as a laborer in the Midvale Steel Company. There was a very common problem they faced in those days, which was of soldiering. It is a phenomenon of workers purposely operating well below their capacity. I'm sure many of us will have the same complaint about our juniors and staff in the hospital. Well, Taylor attributed soldiering to three causes. He believed that workers thought that if they became more productive, fewer of them will be needed and therefore jobs will be eliminated. Non incentive wage systems encouraged low productivity, and they feared that management will decrease their per unit pay if the quantity increased. Workers wasted much efforts by relying on rule of the thumb methods rather than optimal work methods that can be determined by scientific study of the task. To counter soldiering and to improve efficiency, Taylor began to conduct experiments to determine the best level of performance for certain jobs. What was necessary to achieve this performance? He brought upon the piece rate incentive system, which is based on the fact that you pay the worker, you don't pay the position. He was the pioneer of time and motion study, which is there is one best way to perform a task. This included to evaluate a task by breaking down into small parts and carefully selecting workers with the right abilities to perform each task, giving the workers apt training and incentives, and using scientific principles to plan the work methods to ease the way for the workers to do their job. Now, as managers of a hospital, we may spend some time observing how any task is being performed in the hospital. Example, shifting of the patient from the ward to the OT table and then back again after the operation is complete, or transporting of biomedical waste from the ward to the central storage, and we can try out these principles. Further advancement in the same field was by Frank Gilbreth, who is hailed as the father of motion study. Gilbreth served in the US Army during World War I. His assignment was to find quicker and more efficient means of assembling and disassembling small arms. He researched the basic sequence and the best sequence and minimum numbers of motions needed to complete a task. He found 17 therbliks or hand movement of workers. Example, select, search, position, hold, etc. He studied the practice of bricklaying of a wall, and he found that it involved 18.5 different types of hand movements. Through research, he brought it down to four motions only. Imagine the psychomotor skill activities that any surgeon or a nurse does. Example, the process of tapping blood in the blood donation process. Can we reduce the number of movements, the motions? Of course, you will argue that these analogies from the factory environment to the hospital setup are far too impractical. You may be right, but your sensitization to this paradigm may bring about a slight difference in your approach. And this is exactly the objective of learning about approaches to management. Well, Lillian Gilbreth, wife of Frank Gilbreth, carried on with the same endeavor and she became the first woman to be a management thinker. We had Henry Gantt, another great scientific management approach thinker. He is best known for his Gantt chart, which is the first visual device to maintain production control and compare it with the actual to the planned performance. He famously said, "We cannot drive people, we must direct their performance." The most famous of the administrative theory approach, which is part of the classical approach, was Henry Fayol. He is known as the father of general administration. He classified management activities into six categories: technical activities, which are production, manufacture, adaptation; commercial activities, which is the buying and selling; financial activities, which is the optimal use of the capital; security activities, protection of the property and person; accounting activities, which is stock taking, balance sheet, costs and statistics; and managerial activities, which includes what we have already studied: planning, organizing, commanding, controlling, etc. One of the most commonly asked questions in management is 14 Principles of Management by Fayol. This is division of work or specialization, authority and responsibility, combination of official authority deriving from the manager's official position and personal authority, intelligence, experience, moral worth, and past services. Discipline, respect for any kind of agreement. Unity of command, where employees should receive orders from one superior only. Here, there is a slight change in the medical world. For example, you have got the nursing staff taking commands both from the doctors and from the nursing administrators. But interestingly, you will remember that the type of work which is given from the nursing advisors, administrators, and the doctors will be quite different. Unity of direction, where each group of activities must have one head and one plan. They should be part of the bigger picture. Then the interests, where there should always be subordination of the individual interest to the general larger interest of the organization. And then you have remuneration, fair, affordable, giving maximum satisfaction to the employees and also to the employer. Well, these 14 principles, 7 coming in the next slide, is difficult to remember. Therefore, we have a very famous mnemonic for this. DAT, USSR. Oh, I see. Of course, we don't have USSR anymore. But this mnemonic is famous and still holds good. The eighth one is centralization, extent to which an authority is concentrated or decentralized, dispersed. You have the scalar chain, where the proper hierarchy in the organization is there to facilitate the flow of authority and communication. There is order, which is the systematic arrangement of things and people in the organization. Every material should be in its place and there should be a place for every material. Right man on the right job. Equity, where all employees are treated equally with respect to justice and kindness. You have stability, where you have to retain employees to avoid huge costs of selection and training. Initiative, where the staff is motivated. And esprit de corps, or unity is strength. And there is always success when there is synergy. The same mnemonic applies here. Now we come to the bureaucratic theory approach, where we have Max Weber. he was one guy against nepotism. He believed that bureaucratic approach was the highly structured, formal, impersonal work specialization and jobs were clearly defined. He advocated impersonality, means rational decisions to be taken based on facts only. And he wanted managers to be immune from affection, hatred, passion, etc. Of course, there was criticism that this destroyed the individual creativity and flexibility to respond to the complex changes in the environment. Then we have the behavioral approach where the human element is prime. Well, in behavioral approach, we had Mary Parker Fallett, who is known as the mother of modern management. She said that management was the art of getting things done through other people. Interesting part was constructive conflict, where she said that there are three ways to respond to any conflict. Dominance, which is the win loss method, victory of one side over the other, works in the short term, but it is unproductive in the long run. The second method was compromise or loss, each party having to give up something. But the last method was of integration, which means creatively incorporating the parties' fundamental interests into the solution, which is the win-win solution. In behavior approach, there was a very famous gentleman by the name of Elton Mayo, who's known as the father of the human relation approach. Well, he was the pioneer of the Hawthorne study at Chicago's Western Electric Hawthorne Works. This is a very famous experimental study. And there was an unexpected result. Well, the study was to know what is the productivity of the workers in relation to the effect of the lighting condition. So it was quite naturally hypothesized that as the lighting effects would be more and more, as it would be more illumination, the workers' productivity would have increased. But there was a lack of consistent correlation between lighting levels and the output. Well, this was attributed to an interesting finding known as the Hawthorne effect, which refers to a type of reactivity in which individuals modify an aspect of their behavior in response to their awareness of being observed. Well, the behavior approach of Abraham Maslow, hierarchy of needs. Maslow was known as the father of the humanistic psychology. Well, this is my favorite part. Maslow said that there is a hierarchy of needs which existed. And if you introspect, you will also agree. The hierarchy remains till today a very popular framework in sociology research and management training. You have the first level of basic needs or psychological needs, which is food, water, sleep, sex, homeostasis, and excretion. Going further up, you have the safety needs, which is security, order, stability. Well, these two, basic needs and safety needs, they are known as the physical survival needs of a person. And they form the first two steps of the ladder or the most foundations of this hierarchy of needs. If you go further up, then you have the love and belonging need, which are the psychological needs. Further up, you have the esteem level, the need to be competent, recognized, status. These first four levels are known as the deficit needs or the D needs. And then higher up you have the cognitive level, which is the intellectually stimulating themselves and exploring level. And then you have the aesthetic levels where there is a need for harmony, order and beauty. And last, you have a need for self-actualization. This hierarchy of needs, this pyramid is very, very popular. And you will find that every person at any point of time in his life is somewhere on this ladder. You have to first understand where you yourself are in this ladder. And then you should try to understand where the person who you are dealing with, at which rung of the ladder does he belong to. And therefore, you will understand that what is going to motivate that person. By introspection, you will realize that maybe most of us belong to the third or fourth level, where in fact the whole lives pass on trying to content our esteem needs. And there are very few who go up still further and reach to the highest level of self actualization. Who is a self actualized person? Well, Maslow used the term meta motivation to describe a self actualized person who is driven by the innate forces beyond their basic needs so that they may explore and reach their full human potential. He gave the example of Albert Einstein. Well, I'd like to quote the example of Buddha. Maslow famously said that if all you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail. This is from his book Psychology of Science. For self actualized persons, we have a famous example of Bill Gates. I doubt that Bill Gates has any loan to repay or he worries about tuition of his children. Yet you see, he continues to work, largely in the area of philanthropy. If he doesn't need money, what motivates Bill Gates? Having made such a big fortune, he is now using his talents and money also to help the sick and the poor across the world. This is a good example of self actualized person. In the behavior approach, the next thinker is Douglas McGregor. He famously gave theory X and theory Y. The belief was that managers thought about their workers belonging to either of these categories. A person may be belonging to theory X, where the manager assumes that the person is disliking work, he is lazy, he dislikes responsibility, and must always be coerced to perform. On the other side, he may have an opinion of persons belonging to theory Y. The assumption is that employees likes work, he likes creativity, he seeks responsibility, and can exercise self-direction. It is the style of management which will differ regarding X and Y. For X, you require an authoritative style and you will have to micromanage his activities. And for theory Y people, you will have to try out the participative style and leave him independent. Next is the quantitative approach. During the World War II, mathematicians, physicists, and other scientists joined together to solve problems of the military. The quantitative school of management is a result of research that was conducted during war. There was use of quantitative techniques such as statistics, information, models, computer stimulations to improve decision making. Management science approach was there where mathematical models were used, statistical methods for decision making, budgeting. Then there was the operation management approach where the production process was used for timely delivery of product of services. And lastly, there was the management information system, which was computer based information system where raw data was transformed into information and provided to managers in needed form at the right time. A hospital administrator is so much dependent nowadays on this management information system. We have got so many types of hospital statistics that we will be studying in our future videos. You have the daily censuses, you have the bed occupancy rates, the bed turnover intervals, the bed turnover rates, the total patient day care, the vacancy rates, the hospital sanctioned beds, functional bed, etc. etc. Finally, we look at the modern approach, where we have the systems approach, the contingency approach, and the theory Z. Well, the systems approach, where West Churchman played the leading role. This simply says that you have got inputs in the form of raw material, labor, finances, information, which goes inside the system and it undergoes a transformation process with the help of operations, methods, where employees act on them and managers also direct these activities. And this leads to the transformation into outputs or the goods or the services. and it is the feedback given back which is very important. So everything is interrelated and interdependent, and the organization is a dynamic system. Then we have the contingency or situational approach. It says that no one single method or principle of management is the best. Different situations need different types of leadership. Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard, they gave the situational leadership theory. There is a need to match two key elements properly: the leader's leadership style and the follower's maturity or the preparedness level. Now, there are four situations. In M1 category, you have got followers who are low in competence and low in commitment. In the second category of M2, we have followers who are low in competence but high in commitment. In M3 category, we have got followers who are high in competence but very low on the commitment. And on the M4 category, we have got followers who are high on competence and also high on commitment. Well, what will be the leadership style you will approach all these followers with? For the M1 category, you will give the telling type of leadership style, which is the directive and the authoritative approach. The leader makes the decision and he tells the employee what to do. For the M2 category, you will use the selling approach, where the leader is still the decision maker, but he communicates and works to persuade the employees rather than simply directing them. In the M3 category, the leader will have to use the participative style, where the leader works with the team members to make the decisions, he supports and encourages them, and he is most democratic. And for the M4 category, the leader assigns decision-making responsibility to the team members and only oversees their work. Lastly, we have the theory Z by William Auchis. It is a combination of American and Japanese style of management, which believes in increasing the employee's loyalty to the company by providing a job for life with a strong focus on well-being of the employee, and which is both on and off the job, a perfect work-life balance. Well, now after we have seen so many approaches to management, we realize that all approaches were revolutionizing during their own times. There are lessons to learn from each approach. There is no best one approach. Well, my best take home is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Choose your own by going through the video again and again. Thank you so much for your patient hearing, and I look forward along with you to my next video, which shall be coming next week. Thank you.